3 ships, 2 oil tankers and a cargo vessel, seized, held right now somewhere off the Horn of Africa by armed pirates. And here's what nobody is saying loudly enough. The naval forces that spent a decade eliminating this threat, they're gone, pulled out, redirected to the Persian Gulf because of the war in Iran. The ocean just got a lot more dangerous, and the people who figured that out first weren't governments, they were pirates. This is May 2026, and Somali piracy, a threat that the world spent billions of dollars and a decade of naval operations suppressing, is back. According to a May 12th advisory from the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, Somali pirates are currently holding at least 3 vessels, 2 oil tankers, and a general cargo and cement carrier. The vessels were captured between April 21st and May 2nd. One of them was hijacked off the coast of Yemen and then diverted to Somali waters. This did not happen by accident. The intensifying conflict in the Middle East has choked traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital route for roughly 20% of the world's oil, natural gas, and critical raw materials. To avoid it, carriers are detouring around Africa's southern tip, extending travel times by weeks and pushing maritime traffic directly into the volatile Somali basin. The pirates didn't go looking for targets. The targets came to them. If you want fast, fact-based coverage of the stories that actually move the world, subscribe right now, because this one is accelerating by the hour. Let's go back to where this starts. Not Somalia, but Iran. When conflict in the Middle East intensified and the Strait of Hormuz became too dangerous for commercial shipping, carriers faced a brutal calculation. Risk one of the world's most contested naval choke points, or take the long way around Africa. Most chose the detour. That rerouting is costing an estimated $1 million in additional expenses per vessel due to soaring fuel, insurance, and operational costs. Think about what that means in practice. Hundreds of vessels, tankers carrying crude oil, cargo ships loaded with consumer goods, cement carriers heading for construction sites across Asia and Europe, all suddenly flooding shipping lanes off the Somali coast. Lanes that, until very recently, were kept relatively quiet by sustained international naval presence. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Agency warned that the piracy threat level remains severe along the Somali coast and basin, waters that gained global infamy as a primary hotspot for maritime hijacking during the late 2000s. That warning is not hypothetical. It's a live operational alert. At its peak in 2011, Somali piracy hit a record 237 incidents, costing the global economy $7 billion. During that year, over 3,800 mariners faced attacks involving assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. $7 billion. 3,800 sailors. That was the cost the last time this got out of control. Now consider this. Only a small number of incidents were recorded off the Somali coast in 2025, according to a report from the International Maritime Bureau. At the time, it stated that the lack of a broader resurgence in Somali piracy reflected the strong deterrent effect of sustained naval presence. Sustained naval presence. That was the key phrase. And that presence is now eroding. The European Union Naval Force, Operation Atalanta, acknowledged the recent rise in piracy in an update last month. The force said it had successfully liberated an Iranian-flagged vessel off the coast of Somalia after forcing pirates who had hijacked it to abandon it. 1 vessel freed, 3 still held. Operation Atalanta urged transiting vessels to maintain heightened vigilance and report suspicious activity. That's the official guidance for sailors operating these routes right now. Stay alert. Report anything suspicious, because the cavalry may not get there in time. The timeline of captures is also telling. 3 ships seized in just 11 days, between April 21st and May 2nd. That is not a random spike. That is coordination. That is a network that sensed an opportunity and moved fast. And the question that no intelligence agency has yet publicly answered: who is running these operations, and how deep does the organization go? There is an alliance being discussed that almost nobody in Western media is covering properly. Pirate networks and the Houthis. Stay with me, because if that connection is real, this is no longer just a maritime crime story. Somali lawmaker Mohammed Dini told CNN that recent piracy incidents stem from opportunism, with shifting international maritime shipping routes driven by geopolitical crises. He added that the current situation in the Middle East gives pirates a pretext to remobilize. But he also said something that most analysts are not yet discussing on mainstream television. Dini warned that pirate networks are forging alliances with Yemen's Houthi forces, who have targeted vessels in the Red Sea as part of their support for Hamas in its conflict with Israel. Let that land for a moment. The Houthis have already demonstrated they can disrupt global shipping through the Red Sea using drone strikes, missile attacks, and naval mines. Now, a Somali lawmaker with direct knowledge of the situation is raising the possibility that pirate networks operating in the Indian Ocean basin are coordinating with, or at minimum taking strategic cues from, that same organization. This is not confirmed. It has not been independently verified, but it is a named official on the record, and if true, it transforms what looks like a crime wave into something with a much more deliberate geopolitical architecture. Do you think this situation escalates further in the coming weeks, or is this the ceiling? Drop your read in the comments. I want to know what you think. Now here's where the strategic picture gets complicated. Manu Lakunze, an international relations lecturer at the University of Aberdeen, told CNN that the war in Iran had created a security vacuum fueling this piracy resurgence. Naval fleets, which previously focused on suppressing pirate raids, have been reassigned to escort cargo ships through the Strait of Hormuz. He was direct about the consequence. Redeployment from the region to concentrate forces in the Persian Gulf has created opportunities, activating networks that can execute specific pirate missions. Activating networks. That is the language of intelligence analysis, not general crime coverage. It implies dormant infrastructure, financing, weapons caches, informants inside port systems, established ransom negotiation channels, waiting to be switched back on. And now, it has been. The European Union Naval Force told CNN it believes 3 pirate action groups are currently active in the northern part of Somalia, and that these groups are resourced with land elements to provide support and sea elements. 3 distinct groups, land and sea components, active right now. The economic consequences of this extend far beyond the ships currently being held. Every carrier operating on the Africa circumnavigation route is now calculating additional risk premiums. Insurance underwriters are already raising rates for these lanes. When insurance costs rise across hundreds of vessels simultaneously, that cost does not stay at sea. It lands in ports, in warehouses, in supermarkets, in fuel prices. The Iran war choked one route. The piracy resurgence is now threatening the alternative. There is no clean detour left. Here is the contradiction that should be making headlines and isn't. The EU Naval Force told CNN that its assets have not been modified due to the current international situation, and that they keep their assets the same as in previous months. But an academic analyst with direct knowledge of maritime security deployments told CNN the exact opposite, that naval redeployment to the Persian Gulf has created the vacuum that is enabling these attacks. 2 official narratives, directly contradicting each other, one coming from the force responsible for patrolling these waters, the other coming from someone with no institutional incentive to understate the threat. Someone is wrong, or someone is not telling the full picture. And the sailors on those 3 seized vessels are living in the gap between those 2 statements. In Karachi, Pakistan this week, families gathered in the street. Families of Pakistani crew members of an oil tanker seized by pirates in Somalia demonstrated during a protest. These are not abstractions. These are wives who haven't heard their husband's voice in weeks, children who don't know where their fathers are, parents who are watching news channels trying to extract any piece of information about whether the men they love are being fed, whether they're being hurt, whether anyone is negotiating for their release. Maritime piracy does this. It doesn't just take ships, it takes people, holds them in a legal and diplomatic limbo that can stretch for months, sometimes longer, with no criminal justice system capable of resolving it quickly. Ransom negotiations happen through back channels. Governments publicly disclaim involvement while intelligence services quietly facilitate. The families sit and wait. During the peak piracy years, crew members were sometimes held for over a year. They described psychological deterioration, inadequate food, threats, and the crushing uncertainty of not knowing whether the negotiation process was moving at all. Some never came home. The men currently held on those 3 vessels, the tankers, the cargo ship, are in exactly that position right now. and their numbers could grow. Think about who crews these vessels. Maritime workers from Pakistan, the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, countries where seafaring is one of the most reliable paths out of poverty, one of the few jobs that can put a child through university and keep a family stable. These men take on enormous risk, spend months at sea, away from everyone they love, to move the oil and grain and cement and electronics that the rest of the world consumes without thinking about where it came from. Now picture those same men, armed guards boarding their vessel in the dark, ordered at gunpoint to change course. Since the early 1990s, Somalia has lacked a functioning central government, allowing piracy to thrive. The crisis intensified when shipping companies began paying ransoms that escalated from thousands to multi-million-dollar payouts. That escalation logic matters. Every ransom paid is a business case for the next attack. It tells pirate networks that the math works, that the risk of maritime hijacking, measured against the potential payout, is favorable. And as traffic increases through these waters, and as the naval presence thins, that calculation gets even more favorable. Dini emphasized that long-term domestic instability has left Somalia's coastline vulnerable, weakening local institutions and lowering the risks for pirate networks. While those behind the recent maritime raids have yet to be identified, previous ship captures have often involved young Somalis from impoverished communities and armed extremists affiliated with global terror networks. There's a generation of young Somali men, no functioning state, no reliable employment, no institutional path forward, for whom piracy networks represent the only structured organization offering income, community, and a kind of violent agency in a country that has offered them almost nothing else. That is not a justification, it is an explanation. And it matters because no amount of naval patrols permanently fixes a problem whose roots are poverty, state collapse, and decades of abandoned international obligations toward one of the world's most fragile nations. The ships being rerouted around Africa because of the Iran war are passing through Somali waters for the same reason they can't take the Red Sea. Geopolitics made the decision. Sailors are bearing the cost. And the families in Karachi protesting in the street, they didn't make any of these decisions either. The immediate military question is this. With 3 active pirate groups confirmed and 3 vessels already taken, how long before a 4th seizure? If ransom negotiations for the current captives drag on, as they historically do, the pirate networks generating no income from those vessels may move to take more. More traffic, more targets, more attacks. And if the Houthi alliance angle has any substance, the strategic dimension shifts completely. From maritime crime to asymmetric warfare against global supply chains, with the Indian Ocean as a second front to the Red Sea pressure already being applied. The naval forces now focused on the Persian Gulf cannot be in 2 places simultaneously. That is not an opinion. It is a physical constraint. Something has to give. Step back from the individual ships. Look at the map. The Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed to normal commercial shipping due to the Iran conflict. The Red Sea route through the Suez Canal has been unstable since the Houthis began their campaign. And now, the African circumnavigation route, the only remaining alternative for a significant portion of global trade, is becoming operationally dangerous. There is no 4th option. For carriers moving oil, raw materials, and manufactured goods between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, the math is running out of clean solutions. The rerouting is costing an estimated $1 million in additional expenses per vessel. Multiply that across hundreds of transits per month. Add rising piracy insurance premiums. Add the ransom exposure now priced into maritime risk assessments for this region. The cost of global trade is moving structurally higher, not because of a temporary disruption, but because multiple crisis points are compounding simultaneously. This is what analysts mean when they talk about supply chain fragility. Not just one thing going wrong, but several things going wrong at the same time in connected ways, where each failure makes the others harder to manage. The historical parallel worth understanding is 2008 to 2011. Somali piracy escalated gradually before it peaked. It was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow, compounding problem that the international community underestimated for years because each individual incident seemed manageable. By the time the full scale became undeniable, hundreds of sailors were being held, billions were being extracted from the global economy, and the naval response required was massive. The current trajectory has similar characteristics. 3 ships seized, 3 active pirate groups confirmed. Naval redeployment creating a security gap. A lawmaker raising the possibility of Houthi coordination. Ransom economics still working in the pirates' favor. Operation Atalanta has been patrolling these waters for nearly 2 decades. Their continued presence is not in question, but their capacity relative to an expanding threat against a backdrop of competing military priorities is very much an open question. What intelligence agencies are watching right now? Whether the 3 identified pirate groups are operating independently or under coordinated command. Whether ransom payments flow back into the same financial networks that fund Houthi operations. And whether the pace of hijackings accelerates before any political resolution to the Iran conflict makes the Hormuz route viable again. What governments may now do: increase naval presence in the Somali basin specifically, push for expanded mandates for Operation Atalanta, apply diplomatic pressure on Somalia's federal government to improve coastline monitoring, and potentially re-examine whether the naval reallocation to the Persian Gulf has left a gap that requires a separate response. None of those are fast processes, and pirate networks operate on a completely different timeline than diplomatic negotiations. The sailors on those 3 vessels are waiting. The carriers rerouting through these waters every day are calculating. And the pirate networks, with confirmed land elements, sea elements, and what appears to be an organizational sophistication not seen since the peak years, are watching the gap between those 2 timelines and deciding what to do with it. The Strait of Hormuz may eventually reopen. The war in Iran will not last forever, but the networks now reactivated along the Somali coast. The infrastructure, the financing, the recruitment pipelines, the established ransom channels, those do not simply switch off when the political situation changes. That is the longer story here, and it is far from over. 3 ships held, 3 pirate groups active, a security vacuum expanding by the day, and a potential alliance between Somali pirates and Houthi forces that nobody has yet been able to confirm or rule out. What do you think happens next? Does this escalate into a full revival of Somali piracy at 2011 levels, or does the international response contain it before it reaches that point? Tell me in the comments. And if you're watching this story like I am, because it connects the Iran conflict, Red Sea disruption, global trade, and now piracy into a single cascading crisis, subscribe. Because the next development in this story may come before the week is out.